The material contained in the Diverging podcast is for informational purposes only. The ideas and opinions expressed in the podcast does not represent the views or missions of the National Rail Passenger Corporation or Amtrak or the Washington Metro Rail Safety Commission. This is a Diverging podcast.
Approach Diverging, milepost 20.04. Diverging clear, milepost 20.06. Welcome to Diverging Clear, your transportation podcast, with your hosts William Moore and Jermaine Walker.
Welcome to the Diverging Clear podcast. I'm your host, William E. Moore. Before I jump into my inaugural YouTube video, but this is also will be available on Spotify, Apple, Google Play, Anchor, all your traditional audio podcast versions. First, let me introduce myself. My name is William E. Moore, as I stated before. I am the CEO and founder of EME Rail Solutions LLC, a consulting service aimed at providing solutions for the rail and transportation industry. Some might ask, well, why rail and transportation? Simple, because I love all aspects of it, and why engage in a career that you aren't passionate about? I love figuring out how to make transportation and railroads move goods and people more efficiently. In this process, it helps create good paying jobs in the communities that they operate in. I've recognized the important link between efficient transportation and a vibrant domestic economy. And plus, it's nothing like standing trackside as a double-stack train rolls by, over 10,000 feet long and 200 plus containers. I'm a transportation and rail geek. I can't help it. So, just a little brief information. I didn't want to go into a whole resume and point out everything because I talked to you for a whole episode about that. But first couple things here I wanted to talk about is some pretty good, pretty busy news week already in the transportation industry, in particular in the rail sector. Will be probably more big time stories coming forward as the the new infrastructure bill begins to take shape in Washington, and pretty sure we'll have some pretty big announcements as that comes to hopefully start coming to fruition. But first story I'm going to cover here is the big news over the weekend of the Canadian Pacific Railway, CP Rail, offering to buy the Kansas City Southern for just over $25 billion. I believe with debt, it's going to come to just under $29 billion acquisition price for the property. But this was in Bloomberg on Sunday, and this was the release that Bloomberg had published on Sunday, March 21st. Canadian Pacific Railway Limited has offered to buy Kansas City Southern for $25 billion, according to people familiar with the transaction. The Calgary-based company has offered $275 a share in a cash and stock deal, said the people who asked not to be named because the information isn't yet public. The transaction might be announced as soon as Sunday, which it was. Also, according to the article, the transaction will give the Canadian Pacific access to the Kansas City, Missouri-based company's sprawling Midwestern rail network that connects farms in Kansas and Missouri to ports along the Gulf of Mexico. It would also give reach to Mexico, which made up almost half of Kansas City Southern's revenue last year, and create the only network that cuts through all three North American countries. No filing has been posted with the U.S. Surface Transportation Board as of Friday, according to the regulator's website. A successful deal will also come as trade across the three nations is expected to pick up under the Biden administration. Kansas City Southern's unique network linking Mexico's largest industrial cities and ports to the U.S. Midwest also would be positioned to benefit if the coronavirus pandemic and fraying ties between U.S. and China prompt companies to move lower wage manufacturing from Asia to North America. The offer isn't the only recent bid for Kansas City Southern. In September, Dow Jones reported the company rejected a $20 billion offer from the Blackstone Group Incorporated and Global Infrastructure Partners. So when you take a look at what's going on here, we knew, those in the rail industry knew that someone was going to be making a play for the Kansas City Southern. I'll be honest with you, the Canadian Pacific, which when you take a deep dive into it, looks like a natural fit, but I'm not going to lie, I never anticipated that the KCS might go to the Canadian Pacific. But when you take a look at some of the probably the key driving factors in this acquisition, one thing is, as mentioned in the article, the single carrier between Canada, U.S., Mexico. This will reduce the significant lag time associated with interchanges to move freight from Canada to the U.S. to Mexico. So if you have goods moving from Canada to Mexico, they oftentimes get tangled up in interchanges here in the U.S., seeing as it has to traverse numerous partners or rail lines to make a connection into Mexico. So one big thing will probably be the streamlined operations of being able to have a single carrier that can touch all three continents or all three countries on the North American continent in a pretty efficient way. When you look at some of the acquisitions and some of the property that the Canadian Pacific currently has, one of the lines that probably is going to become of significance due to this transaction will be the DM&E, the Dakota, Minnesota, and Eastern that CP Rail acquired in the early 2000s. Now, the original thought for that acquisition was for the CP to eventually reach the Powder River Basin and provide another ways of moving coal out of the Powder River Basin to eastern, essentially power plants and, purveyors that need the coal out of the Powder River Basin. But since coal has taken a significant downturn, with coal-fired power plants shutting down, the green movement in the U.S. has also reduced the amount of coal that's being burned. It started to like the DM&E purchase was a bad move on the part of the CP. But as I always like to say, a lot of these moves, strategic moves, aren't done in the time frame of 6 to 10 months. At some point in time, maybe the CP, I'm just speculating here, this is no proof of this, but the DM&E now becomes a central player in integrating the Kansas City Southern network into the Canadian Pacific network. So, what didn't come to fruition in regards to the Powder River Basin will definitely come into fruition now as far as the DM&E property when it comes to the, sorry about that, when it comes to the acquisition of the Kansas City Southern. Now, for all the rail fans out there, they saw that the name is going to be Canadian Pacific Kansas City. Trust me, that name will be changed into a more streamlined name if the transaction is approved by the STB. So for all of those turning their noses up at it as a business decision, that name isn't going to stick. Trust me, it'll be modified at some point in time. Now, when you look at some of the other advantages of this, and where some points of opportunity is going to come about, is one of the biggest links for the Canadian Pacific, or I'm sorry, the Kansas City Southern in the Southeast is known as the Meridian Speedway. Now, the Meridian Speedway is a joint venture between the KCS and Norfolk Southern. One concern I do have is this could become a point of contention in this transaction. This is a crucial link between Texas and the Southeast. For those unfamiliar with the Meridian Speedway, it is a 320-mile east-west rail line between Shreveport, Louisiana, and Meridian, Mississippi. Would the NS object to the acquisition? It's not a clear yes or no answer. It all depends on how this deal is structured and what rights are granted towards the Norfolk Southern as far as the Meridian Speedway. If it seems like it's going to become an issue, this could delay or possibly cause some impediment on the transaction moving forward. However, the NS and CP have other areas of trackage rights and haulage agreements, so from the outside looking in, it shouldn't be a point of objection. However, the CSX actions in the Northeast, which we'll talk about here in a little while, with the Pan Am Railways may have the NS apprehensive to support this transaction. So that's just just a kind of a brief, just kind of as details come forward about the transaction and the structure of it and how some of the different things are going to play out. This is going to be an interesting transaction to take place. When you look at revenue and you look at mileage, this transaction should be categorized by the STB as a minor transaction. However, the significance of the KCS into Mexico may cause some the STB to look at it as a separate, as more of a significant transaction or major acquisition due to the characteristics of the KCS network. Now, the one question that I'm kind of investigating myself is what effects will the Mexican regulators have on this proposed transaction? Will they approve of it? As for the KCS, the KCSM, which is their Mexican subsidiary, is under the guise of the Mexican law and regulations and their regulatory processes. So that'll be interesting just to see how that plays out, as this is truly a two-country acquisition regarding two different countries governing and regulatory bodies. So it will be interesting to see how that plays out. But just stay tuned. This is going to get interesting, and possibilities are just off the bat. I would say this makes sense. It's a natural fit for the CP, a fit that I never would even predict it. But it will be interesting to see how this shakes out. And stay tuned, and we'll keep you posted on any other announcements. The next story I'm going to talk about here is the Rio Grande Pacific. Their Colorado Midland and Pacific Railway has made an adjustment to their filing with the STB. According to Progressive Railroading, the Colorado Midland and Pacific Railway Company, CMPR, has asked the Surface Transportation Board to restrict the railroad's proposed lease of the Tennessee Pass Line to prevent its use of transportation of crude oil, coal, and hazardous commodities. The STB is currently considering a notice of exemption to permit CMPR to lease the 163-mile rail line in Colorado from the Union Pacific Railroad. CMPR is a subsidiary of Rio Grande Pacific Corp., which has stated the company has no plans to operate oil trains over the Tennessee Pass. According to the CMPR, this was a statement that they made regarding not running coal or oil or hazardous commodities over that Tennessee Pass line. These erroneous contentions are being made notwithstanding our empathetic statements that the CMPR has no intent, much less ability, to transport these commodities over the line due to the features of the line that make it logistically impractical to do so. CMPR amended filing states, for example, the line has more than 11 miles of 3% grade. To dispel the unwarranted concerns, the CMPR filed an amendment with the STB to place the restrictions on the lease. In doing so, CMPR will be authorized to transport passengers and general commodities except crude oil, coal, and hazardous commodities over the line. The amending filing states, while limitations on the scope of commodities to be handled are not usually imposed, they are not unique. This is an interesting amendment by the Rio Grande Pacific. For one, market conditions dictates that coal, oil, or hazardous commodities would not traverse Tennessee Pass line. Just for the logistically, there's no need for them to go through there. There are already viable routes for those goods through Colorado, and this reactivated rail line just wouldn't serve the purpose of hauling those type of commodities, just for the simple fact that there's no market for them. There's no loading. There's no coal mines. There's no oil refineries. It just doesn't seem as a viable option to even haul those type of commodities. But just the although I understand the likelihood of this specific type of commodities moving over this line was slim at best, I'm not a huge fan of setting this type of precedent. The Rio Grande Pacific could be inserting its very own poison pill in the future viability of this reactivated rail line. It will be very interesting to see how this plays out. Like I said, I just don't think you should, if you have the opportunity, you shouldn't restrict yourself from being able to possibly move goods. Now, I know in regards to the crude oil, coal, I know a lot of environmental groups and, even localities, because of the steepness of that grade, that terrain that line traverses, you wouldn't want that type of traffic moving through there just for the sake of, which is part of the reason why the Union Pacific deactivated the rail line. It essentially left it intact, but haven't moved freight over it for got to be the better part of 10 to 15 years, maybe even longer. Don't have my exact numbers here, but there's just no need for them to, at this time, move goods or commodities over that line. But it's just interesting that you never know what the future holds, and to me, it just seems like a kind of a broad, jumpy kind of way to kind of restrict your lease to get the rail line. But like I said, maybe they have other plans. Like I said, I don't have any insight on that, inside information on that. But it just seems weird that you would file that if the STB didn't make a recommendation for it or instill that type of condition on it. So an interesting play. I'll be curious to see how that plays out. But just an interesting amendment. I hadn't seen that before for a company looking to acquire a line to possibly subject themselves to what could be viewed as a poison pill moving forward, even though that traffic was highly unlikely to move through that route anyway. So just interesting, just something I said I'm not used to seeing happen preemptively before any conditions are imposed or any more questions were asked. I'm going to take my first break here right now for the Diverging Clear podcast. Give me a second, take a break, kick back, and be back here shortly.
Diverging Clear is sponsored by EME Rail Solutions, LLC. We don't own rail cars, locomotives, or tracks. But if you do, we provide cutting-edge solutions to maximize your assets. Visit us at emerail.net to learn more. Diverging Clear is also brought to you by Three Kings Freight Brokerage, LLC. Visit Three Kings Freight Brokerage LLC.com to learn more about their services.
This week, the Massachusetts Department of Transportation, the Massachusetts Bay Transportation Authority, various state lawmakers, and the Vermont rail system were among those expressing concerns about the impact the acquisition would have on overall rail competition in New England. The filings also were critical of related transactions involving CSX and Pan Am Southern, a joint venture that provides Norfolk Southern Railway with access to New England via the former Boston and Maine rail line. Under the proposal, CSX would assume Pan Am's Railway's 50% stake in Pan Am Southern, and the new Genesee and Wyoming Incorporated Short Line will be a neutral operator of the Pan Am Southern. In addition, CSX wants the Pan Am Railway's acquisition to be considered a minor transaction under the board's consideration. Recent filings asked the STB to review CSX's application as a significant transaction, which will require a longer board review and public comment period. Yesterday, CSX filed a response with the STB. In part, it says, no party has offered a valid basis for requesting that the board classify the transaction as significant or to require the application to be refiled, CSX officials said in the filing. The transaction was carefully structured to eliminate potential competitive harm, enhance competition, and improve the rail network throughout the Northeast. The only thing significant about the transaction is the extent to which it enhances competition and strengthens the rail network in the Northeast. CSX officials also noted that the Class 1's application contains 58 letters of support from shippers, government officials, local communities that favor the benefits the acquisition would provide. Okay, so just to clarify this, these filings of opposition are basically SOP, standard operating procedures, when it comes to acquisitions and mergers and acquisitions in the rail industry. Although these are pretty powerful government and private entities that's filing objections, that's all that they are. They're just filing to get the objections on record. It will hardly influence the STB's decision making on this transaction. And like I said, if you are kind of a rail and transportation geek like myself, you can go back through every single acquisition, major acquisition by a Class 1, especially when they're acquiring stake or acquiring a short line railroad, and there will always be opposition, either filed through government legislators, government law or state or federal lawmakers, other railroads, shippers. You will always see this in every type of transaction. This is nothing new. So as far as I'm concerned, these are just standard operating procedures that take place with M&As, mergers and acquisitions. This is nothing out of the ordinary. You will see it. You'll see them shortly here in the Kansas City Southern CP transaction. You're going to start seeing objections being raised. And it's all just part of the standard operating procedures, the process of filing these transactions. They hardly influence unless it's something just dire, anti-competitive, monopoly type instances that are raised. It's rare that you will see that these objections, they may amount to a few concessions, sometimes opposition carriers that oppose it may be granted trackage rights or allowed to operate certain types of freight or traffic through there. But usually it doesn't amount to much more than just being on record that they oppose the transaction, more than likely because they didn't want to do it. It's just just a little insight to it. But like I say, anytime you see these type of transactions take place, 90% of the time, 99% of the time, you will see some type of opposition to the transaction that's filed with the STB. But 99% of the time, it doesn't amount to much. Maybe granted trackage rights, some type of concession in that deal. But usually, this is just standard operating procedure for those that are fans of the CSX acquiring the Pan Am Railways. The opposition and the filings is not going to have a significant impact on this transaction. So that's the news that I've hopefully caught you up with, the major news stories going on in the rail and transportation industry. As I mentioned before, the transportation and infrastructure bill, more so the infrastructure bill, which will help rebuild some transportation networks, is currently in the early parts of the policy writing and by the Biden administration. So as those details start to be made public, we'll follow those and keep you updated on what's going on with that, what significance it'll have on possibly your community or the nation as a whole. But that would be the more than likely the big news coming out, hopefully here within the next couple weeks or so. So keep a listen out for that. Thank you for joining us today. Don't forget to follow us at Diverging Clear. I'm sorry. I messed that up. Sorry about that. Thank you again for tuning in for the Diverging Clear podcast. Don't forget to email any comments or feedback to divergingclearpodcast@gmail.com. Once again, that's divergingclearpodcast@gmail.com. Also, don't forget to follow us on Twitter at divergingclear1, on Instagram at diverging_clear_podcast. And you can also follow us on Facebook. You can also subscribe to our new YouTube channel. And you can also subscribe wherever you find your favorite podcast, audio podcast, including on Apple, Spotify, Anchor, and Google Play. Thank you for putting up with me. This is my first time doing this full episode. Might not have been my best work. I think I had too many ums and ahs and uhs in there. As we move forward, I will work to eliminate that. I'll get better with the next episode and the episode after that. But I really appreciate you taking the time to listen out. Hopefully I provided some information that may be interesting to you. Until next time, thank you again. Take care. Stay safe. And don't forget to mask up. Talk to you soon. Take care.